so much that I would love to say. I was thinking as they mentioned Stephen's birthday this morning, as Greg said something about it. When he came home from the hospital, my dad was at work. And my uncle, Judd, had bought in a share of a funeral home. And at any rate, they wanted to arrange transportation for Mom, so he sent an ambulance to the hospital and brought my mother home with Steve in an ambulance. And I remember my sister Sarah saying, "Mom's home." And I ran to the door, and there was Mother getting out of an ambulance. It scared me to death because I thought something was wrong with Mom. She was in an ambulance. And it turned out she was bringing Steve home. That scared me again. Not really. But I have enjoyed having him as my brother throughout the years. And the older he gets, the more I love and appreciate him. And the more I love and appreciate his wonderful wife, who has been there for him for a few years. I better watch out. She's going to feed me today. What do you say when you're going to a congregation that you know but you don't really know? And I've really enjoyed getting to know you all better. And but I don't know you like Steve knows you. I have known you long enough now to see the stamp of Jim Mouter on this congregation. I can see a lot of his influence in you, and I thank God for Jim and for the influence he has had upon you. I think lessons that help us with life every day. Tonight, I'm going to talk about a lesson. I'm going to preach to myself tonight. Help, I failed. And I might fail again. What am I going to do? And we're going to talk about that tonight. But this morning I want to talk about a faith that overcomes doubt. If you look at this passage, and as it was read to us a few moments ago, you might note that Jesus curses a fig tree and it withers immediately, and the disciples are up. And wouldn't you? I mean, it's one thing to watch. We had a pear tree in our backyard when we moved there in 2003. In 2004, you could see it was dying, and I went and contacted the people, and in another year, he said, kill it. It's diseased. It has a disease. And so I chopped it down. But Jesus cursed it, and immediately it withered. And they marveled, and they said something to Jesus. And look at this statement. Truly I say to you, if you have faith and do not doubt, oh my land, you will not only do what it has been done to the fig tree, but even if you say to this mountain, be taken up and thrown into the sea, it will happen. And whatever you ask in prayer, you will receive if you have faith. And you could just sort of hear in the echo, and do not doubt. Doubting. I have some questions for you. The first of the questions is this. If I were to ask you to show your hands, and I'm not asking you to show your hands, if you have doubts about your faith or your relationship with God, raise your hand. Would you raise your hand? Oh, we got a problem. If I ask you to be honest with yourself and say to yourself privately whether or not you've experienced doubts, would your answer change? If I were to ask you to be honest with yourself and say privately to yourself whether or not you have any doubts now, would you say yes or no? I heard a man say you can't have doubts and be a true Christian. Wow. We don't want to be honest about our doubts, do we? We don't we don't really want to tell other people we have doubts. And why don't we? I think there's some reasons for that. And one of them is that it's a sign of weakness, of a lack of faith, and maybe of sinfulness. And so we don't want to say, oh, I've got doubts. Well, in Matthew 14:31, we find a verse, you of little faith, why did you doubt? Well, that makes it sound like doubting's a bad thing, right? And so we don't want to say, yeah, I doubt, because we can hear those haunting words. Or maybe this passage in James 1:6, but he must ask in faith without any doubting. For the one who doubts is like the surf of the sea, driven and tossed by the wind. You don't want to be like that. So you don't want to admit there's doubts. Or 1 Timothy 2 and verse 8, I will therefore that men pray everywhere, lifting up holy hands without wrath and doubting. That hurts, doesn't it? And so we don't want to put ourselves in that kind of a situation. So I want us to define and understand a little bit about doubt. And I think we need to go to some definitions. Okay? Because doubting is used in different ways. Let me give you an example of why we need to look at some definitions. In the King James, you find the word prevent. It means precede today. If we were to take that Greek word and translate it today, it would be precede instead of prevent. To precede something as opposed to preventing something are two different things to us today. Or we might go to the word church. And you going to church? Well, yeah, I'm going to the building because we're having a work party. But that's not church, is it? Because the word church in the Greek never means building. So we have to realize that definitions can make a difference. Here are some English definitions. Webster. To waver in opinion or judgment, to be in uncertainty as to belief respecting anything, to hesitate in belief, to be undecided as to the truth of the negative or the affirmative proposition, to be undetermined, to suspect, to fear, to be apprehensive of, a fluctuation of mind arising from defect of knowledge or evidence, uncertainty of judgment or mind, unsettled state of opinion concerning the reality of an event or the truth of an assertion, so forth. Hesitation. So here are some words that are used, or some definitions that are used of this word doubt. But when we go to the Greek, we find some other words. And I want us just to look at 3 different passages. There are 6 different Greek words that are translated doubt. And if you want to look those up, if you have a Vine's Expository Dictionary of the Old New Testament words, you can look there. Do you have a library, Steve? Don't have a library here. Go to Steve's house and read it there. Really need to start a library. I see a project coming on. Do we have a place to put it? Okay. All right, let's look at these. In Matthew 14:31, you of little faith, why did you doubt? And the word there is distazo, and it means to stand in 2 ways. Jesus said you cannot love mammon and God. It's standing in 2 ways. You're either with God or you're carnal. So that's one way of looking at doubt. In James 1:6, but he must ask in faith without any doubting, for the one who doubts is like the surf of the sea, driven and tossed by the wind. And the word there is diakrino, and it means very little or no faith. Bingo! Folks, that was worth the price of admission. I'm Let's charge it. We think that if you have the smallest of doubt, you forfeit your prayers. But the word there is no doubt. For he must ask in faith as opposed to not having faith. That takes a lot of pressure off, doesn't it? I don't know about you, but when I was preparing this sermon and I ran across that, I wanted to shout hallelujah. I was so thrilled to know that it didn't mean that there's no questions or no problems in your heart. It just means that you do believe they're in God and that he answers prayers. 1 Timothy 2:8, I will therefore that men pray everywhere, lifting up holy hands without wrath and doubting, and the word their dialogue. Gismos, is reasoning or questioning hesitation. Don't bicker about it. Don't sit around and fight about it. Don't try to discuss all of it. Just talk to God about it. I think that's wonderful to know that there are different words, different meanings, and that it's okay to have some doubts, some questions as we come to God. I better watch out. I'm looking at this thing so much and not looking at my notes. There are misconceptions about what it means to doubt as well, and I want to look at a couple. First of all, some people confuse faith and feelings. Some people think that if they've had a spiritual high, for whatever reason, and then things sort of settle down, they become perplexed. Oh, I must be having doubts. You're not going to always be on the mountaintops. We need not to think that faith is a constant high. We like the Psalms because they're upbeat, right? Don't you just love David and his Psalms? But do you realize that 60% of the Psalms you seem to hear the writer saying, "Where are you, God? I need you. Are you going to be there?" Normal faith is allowed to question. Then some people presume that faith is the absence of doubt. Understand there are degrees of faith. There's little faith, great faith, mature faith, and yes, dead faith. That's not all the same level of faith, is it? We need to remember that faith is a journey, and it's going to build, or it should build, as we age in Christ. In our early years as babes, we're going to doubt more. We're going to have a lot more questions, a lot more hesitations. But as we put our faith out to God, and he answers our faith, he accepts the challenge, and he's there for us, our faith grows and we become stronger. Peter had great faith in the minds of the other disciples when he stepped out on the water, right? Can't you just see? Peter gets up, puts that foot across the boat, step out on the water. What are the other disciples thinking? He's going to drown, he's going to drown. And he starts walking, and they say, oh, look at the faith that Peter has. And then Peter sinks. What did Jesus say? Oh, you have little faith. That image they had of Peter shattered. Faith is a journey. Sometimes our doubts are revealed when our faith is tested. So you see, faith and doubt can coexist. Do you question that? You know, we've got a fellow down in Dover who doesn't believe you can question God about anything. And he thinks Job shows that God is angry with anyone who questions him. And I think he needs to mature a little bit. At any rate, look at Mark 9. What do we find? There's a man who asked Jesus, if you can do anything, take pity on us and help us. Jesus says, if you can, all things are possible to he who believes. That's verse 21. We're told that a boy, this man's boy, was, I believe, demon possessed. And he cries out and said, I do believe. Help my unbelief. Oh, isn't he saying, yes, I have some doubts. Help me to overcome my doubts. Michael Luke wrote this: you can be a full-fledged Christian without having to feel like every single question of life has been absolutely settled. And then some people think that doubt is unforgivable. You can't be saved while entertaining doubts, is what they think. You remember the story surrounding the death of John the Baptist? He's been put in jail. And he sends messengers out to Jesus. And what's the question they have for Jesus? Are you the one, or should we look for another? Does that sound like John has some questions? John, we get this picture of John, you know, he's a man's man. He's a mountain man, we'd say in West Virginia. I mean, he's Nazarite. Doesn't cut his hair. He stands up to Herod and puts his finger in his face and says, you shouldn't have that wife. She's your brother's. We see him as being a stalwart of the faith, right? But now it seems like all of a sudden his knees are a little bit weak. And he's got some questions. I've spent my life preparing for the messenger of God to come. Are you that one? Or is it somebody else? Jesus sends a messenger back. But what does he tell the crowd? What's his reaction? Did he say, you tell John the Baptist, don't you be like him and turn your back on God before you die? That's not what he said. He said that he was a man of great faith. So you can have doubts and have great faith, okay? And some people think that all doubt is unhealthy. We've already said it's normal. Gary Parker wrote a book called The Gift of Doubt. We don't think of doubt as being a gift, do we? But here's something, this is a quote that I got online from him. If faith never encounters doubt, if truth never struggles with error, if good never battles with evil, how can faith know its own power? In my own pilgrimage, if I have to choose between faith that has stared doubt in the eye and made it blink, or a naive faith that has never known the firing line of doubt, I will choose the former every time. Lee Strobel wrote these words. To help your body fight off a future disease, doctors will inject you with a small amount of that very same disease, and your body builds up antibodies that will battle off the disease if it ever threatens you. Your body is actually stronger for the experience, Well, when we're infected with some doubts and we seek answers to our questions and deal constructively with the doubt, we emerge stronger than ever because our faith has been confirmed once more. And that gives us new confidence in dealing with doubt, the doubt of the future. You know that sometimes God actually puts us in a position for doubt? Genesis 22 and verse 1. Now it came about after these things that God tested Abraham and said to him, Abraham, and he said, here am I. It's unfortunate that King James says he tempted him, but the ideal here is that God put him to a test. This is the occasion of him offering his son. He put him in a place to test his faith, to check his doubts. That Abraham could have doubted to the point of unbelief, but he didn't. And Abraham came through that ordeal knowing about his faith and how strong his faith was. Do you know that Abraham saw himself plunging that knife into his son? I believe in his mind, he saw that. Because the Roman letter tells us that he believed that God could raise him from the dead. Now, if Abraham believed that God could raise him from the dead, he was ready to plunge that knife all the way in and to watch his son die. Wow. God still tests our faith today. Isn't it so? You may be battling with some doubts, with some struggles right now today. The problem comes when we dwell on the doubt and never battle against it and overcome it with our faith. Faith is the victory, as we say. But we've got to do some fighting. We've got to do some battling. We've got to show to God and to ourselves that we believe. We all have some doubts at times. Oh, it's going to show up. If I do this, it should come. There you go. Some doubts that we may have. We talk about guilt. Sometimes we doubt God has really forgiven. How many times, Steve, has someone come to you and say, I'm not sure I was baptized for the right reason. I'm not sure I'm saved. I've learned more about the Bible and what baptism's about. Would you baptize me again? I don't have any hesitancy if a person says that and making them feel secure with God. But isn't that a doubt? Some wonder if the Bible is infallible. It is the actual revelation of God. There's some people who accept parts of the Bible, but not all of the Bible. Maybe your doubts are more inward, such as I wasn't sincere when I became a Christian. Or some have their doubts as to why God would let evil go unpunished. Habakkuk did. God, how can you let these Israelites go on without punishing them? And God said, I'm going to punish them. I'm going to use the Chaldeans, he says. They're worse people than the Israelites. How can you do that, God? God, Habakkuk's calling God into question. He has some doubts. And maybe, for that matter, some are not sure if there's a God at all because he allows suffering. Oh my. Or there's so much evidence for evolution. Let me tell you something, folks. There's only so much evidence presented. They don't show you all the evidence. They don't show you the evidence that's against evolution. because they want you to believe others. Get all the facts. There are 5 kind of doubters according to Michael Luke. Let's look at them. First of all, natural doubters. People who just have a disposition or to doubt, to question things, to focus on uncertainties. There is the rebellious doubter. Whether they admit it or not, they'd like to be able to do things different than what God said, and so they're rebelling against God, and they're just going to say, I have my questions about it. Or disappointed doubters. These are people who have asked God for something, and God didn't give it to them. And so they've got questions about God, because if God loved me, if God was really a good God, he'd give me the things that I want. And then there are wounded doubters. They've had a tough life. They've faced some bad experiences. And they think, I'm abandoned, I'm defeated. Is God really there for me? And then intellectual doubters. These are people who have questions, and they don't think the Bible answers them all that well. The important thing is not that we have doubts, but how do we handle them? That's next week. I could go on, but we have other things to do. What I want you to realize, though, before we go to the end, is Jesus patiently instructs, encourages, and invites us. Isn't that wonderful? One of the things that I love about the Gospels is Jesus, God, interacting with men. Was he frustrated? Oh, yeah. Oh, ye of little faith. There are times that God, Jesus, was marveled at someone's faith. But for the most part, he had to be very patient. So he instructed, he encouraged, he gave them a model, and he invited them to accept God's challenge. And he invites you to that challenge. He invites you to come to God and put your trust in him and see if it's not true. We're going to sing a song. If you have a need to come and put your faith more deeply into God, or to activate it and make it alive, would you come while we stand and sing?